Well, Stephen, like you, I profess Mac love and have done for many years since the 80s. Steve Jobs, though, he was a remarkable man, and his dying early is such a shame.
Yes, I mean, he's the same age as my brother, he's only 2 years older than me. Makes me feel suddenly very vulnerable. It was a terrible shock. As Johnny Ive, who made a magnificent eulogy, who's a very dear friend of mine now, I'm happy to say, who's Apple's chief designer, who really, with Steve Jobs, was responsible for turning Apple around, because aside from the influence he's had, people forget that it is the biggest company rescue in history. There's no example of a company being so close to being on the floor. Michael Dell said Apple should be sold for spare parts in early '97. Wow. All my friends who were Windows users scoffed me and said, if you want to get parts for your Macs from now on, you're going to have to go to a hobbyist shop because the company's going to close. All the big tech magazines in '97 were saying Apple was finished, yes. Absolutely finished. And Steve Jobs came back, and he found this company with making far too many different things in disparate ways. The Newton, which, although a brilliant idea, there was a loss. He closed that down. It was making laser writer printers. He closed that down. It was making cameras, quick-take cameras. He closed that down. He said, we've got to start remembering who we are and what we are and what the world is going to be. And he'd come back to Apple because Apple had bought his company Next, which he founded after he'd been fired in 1985, fired from the company he founded. And Next used a Unix-based operating system because as early as 1984, he had said in Byte magazine, I think, Steve Jobs, the history of computing will be computers talking to themselves. It'll be networking. People didn't really know what he meant and couldn't quite see the point. And I can remember in the late 80s talking to the Director General of the BBC and saying the BBC should have email. And he was going, what would be the point of that? And I said, no, it's really good. And people, honestly, one laughs now, but people all the time at that says, right, yes. But I don't really see the point of it. And the same with Twitter, the same with all kinds of things. I think, yeah, it just sounds pathetic. What's the point of that? Yes. And I'm not saying I'm some great visionary, but he really was, because way before anybody else, he absolutely understood the convergence of these technologies. And he said, I was present, happily, luckily, to be present at the Yerba Buena Art Center in a little over a year and a half ago, 2010. April, I think it was, when he launched the iPad 1, and he said, I've always seen Apple as standing at the intersection of technology and the liberal arts. And when I interviewed him for Time magazine, I had an hour alone with him where I walked into the room and he gave a big grin. I'd known him over the years, and he just pushed the iPad towards me and said, with one word, he just said, "Play," and I of course knew how to turn it on. The whole thing was completely intuitive, as all the things that came from Apple are, and I just gasped, but I said to him, shouldn't you have said that Apple stands at the crossroads, the intersection of technology, the liberal arts, and commerce? He said, yeah, but I mean, people hear the word commerce and they just think suits. And I said, no, but I don't think you should be embarrassed about the fact. And I don't. I think the way he radically transformed the fortunes of Apple still only has 6% of the computing market. But even within that, it has the highest profit margins by far. Yes. It is, as you know, its market cap, as they like to call it, its market capitalization, for a brief period overtook that of Exxon, became the largest, the most valuable company on earth. This is from having been on the floor in '97. He found a company in complete disarray, going and pulling itself in lots of different directions at once. And he saw some drawings and prototypes by a young British designer. And he called to see him, and this designer, Johnny Ive, industrial designer, he obviously knew he was going to be fired. This Steve Jobs had arrived and had been firing people left, right, and centre. I mean, every morning they heard of another 300 people had been fired, another 300 people had been fired there. This whole operation had been closed down. This had been closed down, and so he knew he'd be fired. So he hastily scribbled a letter of resignation, so that he'd at least have some modicum of pride. Shoved it in the back of his jeans, and went up to see Steve in his office. And Steve stood there with one of the prototypes that Johnny had made of one of his computers. It was in a translucent plastic one piece with a colour that Australians would always be proud and pleased to remember is called Bondi Blue, and Steve pointed it and said, "This is our next product." And Johnny said, "What?" He said, "Yeah, it's quite brilliant. It's one piece. It's just what we need. It's got to have 2 USB sockets. And Johnny said, "What's a USB socket?" The USB had only just, literally, the IEEE the standard had just been set. The Universal Serial Bus that we all know and love, and has iterated up to USB 3. And he said, "And I want a. It doesn't need a floppy disk." She said, "What?" I said, "Yeah, no, floppy disks are out there." And this was, what? You can't have a machine without a floppy disk. How do you swap information? And he said, you'll swap it through, these memory sticks beginning to appear in cards. So you'll have a card reader which uses USB. You can flop, or you just email yourself the information. Because bandwidth was beginning to increase, exponentially. So this seemed like an unbelievable idea and a hell of a gamble. And he said, so have a CD, but I don't want a tray coming out to put the CD in. Just slot load it, front load it. That had never been seen. So Johnny went away and came up with this beautiful, unique, absolutely revolutionary object. It now looks almost rather fabulously dated. They came in candy colours, named after fruits. There was blueberry and apricot, and yeah, exactly. And then there were the iBooks that came in those colours too, and those clamshell form factors. But it made a profit. In 1998, it was the biggest selling computer in the United States. And suddenly people began to notice Apple again. And he began to appear, I think he appeared for the 3rd or 4th time on the front cover of Time again.